What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron. It's week 5. We're going through injury updates. Again, we have Tom Christ of the Fantasy Injury Team on the channel today. He is a doctor of physical therapy. And pretty much what we do every week is we meet up every Saturday morning and we talk through every injury that's going on in fantasy football. We have a lot of them this week to sort of figure out who you should be playing, who you should be starting, sitting, just expectations for these players and their injuries moving forward. Tom, how are we doing this morning?
I'm good, man. I'm looking forward to some more good football this weekend. I'm fortunate to have DJ Moore on a couple teams, so I'm sitting in a good spot. And as always, I'm ready to talk some injuries.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I actually got lucky enough in my home league. In my home league, I've been down bad. I've had Burrow and Chase stack has been the foundation of my home league, but
Ouch.
I picked up Sam Howell and Logan Thomas this week. I had Fryermuth also get hurt, so I got a nice little start to the week there with Howell and Logan Thomas. Now I will say, people with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I honestly I wasn't even aware that he was really even hurt that much. Or that's a weird way to put it, but you get what I'm saying. Thursday night happens, and it's like I don't think he left early or there was any real indication that something was going on. And now he's coming up on the injury report and he's now listed as doubtful with an abdomen injury. Kind of what has been the timeline with Amon-Ra St. Brown here? Like, how did we get to this point?
So sometimes with these abdominal injuries, it doesn't really always affect them in the moment in the game. It's later that's like, oh, this kind of hurts. Now, there's numerous types of abdominal injuries that could be happening. There's two primary ones that we see most commonly affecting football players. One is not great prognosis. The other, not bad prognosis. So you tell me, do you want the bad one or the good one first?
What's the best case scenario?
Best case scenario is this is an oblique injury, like we saw Jalen Waddle and Puka Nakua deal with earlier. So the obliques are the muscles that are kind of on the sides of your abdominals. They attach on the ribs. They really wrap really the whole side, and do end up coming to around the middle, the front as well. They're responsible for rotating the torso and like bracing and stabilizing. And really, they heal up pretty well. Don't impact production too much, as we've seen. Puka Nakua obviously is balling this year despite an oblique injury. Let's hope that's the case for Amon-Ra. We don't know at this time. The other not as good scenario would be the sports hernia, which is in the medical literature, we're really changing that terminology because it's not a true hernia. We're changing that terminology to just abdominal tendon injury. So what that is, it's an injury to the tendons of the abdominal muscles as they insert on the pubic bone. The problem with the sports hernia, they don't respond well to conservative treatment, and it's really going to impact your cutting, your change of direction. So we know there's reports of Amon-Ra not practicing but sprinting at full speed on the sidelines. If it's a sports hernia, I wouldn't expect the straight line sprinting to be that much of a problem. It's more of the cutting that would be a problem. I'm not going to guess which of these he's dealing with. Dan Campbell said that they'll have more information. Yeah, I think yesterday he said they'll have more information within 24 hours. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if while we're on the show, we get a sleeper or Twitter notification with an update on what's going on there. But we'll keep looking out for that. But just be mindful if it's a sports hernia, not great outlook. He'll probably try to rehab and play through it. It just doesn't always go well. If it's an oblique injury, we're much less concerned.
And it does seem he's doubtful at this point as well, which I think I don't know the true numbers on that. I think that's like an 80% not to play or like a 10% to play. It seems pretty rough that he'll play this week.
It's not looking like he's going to play. I would start to make other plans.
Yeah, 100%. I would look elsewhere. I guess Josh Reynolds gets a slight bump. Nothing too crazy though. Like he's probably still just a flex play. Josh Reynolds there. And I would be tempted to say, hey, Amon-Ra St. Brown can't go, so Jahmyr Gibbs would get an upgrade. But now we have Jahmyr Gibbs on the injury report with a hamstring. So what's going on here?
My concern here is that it was a Friday addition to the injury report. That's never what we want to hear. By all indications, he was full go Wednesday and Thursday. So this injury occurred either during Thursday's practice, probably towards the end, or during Friday's practice. That puts him 2, maybe 3 days post-injury by Sunday. which isn't great. Sometimes these injuries are so minor, though, that it doesn't really impact them. We don't really have information on the severity yet. But here's how I look at it a couple ways. One, they're playing the Panthers, who stink. Do they want to risk further injury with a key asset to their team? Probably not, especially with Montgomery looking so good. So even if Gibbs does play, there is the risk that they don't really play him that much because of this. On the other end, we don't see a dip in fantasy production for running backs after hamstring injuries. So it's kind of unclear, especially since how late this injury occurred. Like if this was something that he injured last week in the game and was kind of a limited participant in practice throughout, but then went on to play, I would say fire him up, no question. Simply because we don't see a dip in production for running backs after this injury. But the fact that it happened Friday is why I'm a little concerned. If they're playing a terrible team, I would err on the side of not starting him, even if he does play, thinking that it may be a very limited role for him this week.
Yeah, this is pretty brutal. Like this is, I mean, like you said, late hamstring. I mean, that is not good. Like you said as well, it's Carolina. Like they're gonna beat the brakes off this team. We're probably gonna see another like 30 carry David Montgomery game, especially if Amon-Ra St. Brown can't go. So yeah, I mean Gibbs is pretty tough with the hamstring. Like that's something that he could re-aggravate during the game. And it is interesting as well with some of these guys. Like you said, the running backs, they're not as prone to the hamstring stuff, but I do wonder if the speed backs. We saw with Aaron Jones as well. You know, these guys who can kind of break off long runs. Gibbs, like his trump card is the 4.3 speed, and if it's a issue, him getting up to that top gear, that's an issue. So I have him as RB22 this week, but I think I'm gonna have to move him down to like probably like 30, probably somewhere in that like high 20, low 30, because it's still a pretty brutal running back landscape. But Gibbs, if you can shy away from him this week, it sounds like that's probably the way to go. Now I am curious if you have Kupp this week, are you firing him up? Kind of what has been the what's been the buzz this week on what he's looked like in practice, the ramp up? I know you said there was like a weird nerve part of this hamstring injury. Where do you kind of expect him to be at this point?
Well, bottom line is if you've got him, you're starting him simply because he's so dominant. But there is some interesting reporting happening here. Let's start with the nerve stuff. We haven't heard anything about that in a while, but I forget if it was on your show or my show where I was saying how it's yes, that's often an underlying problem for hamstrings is the nerve mobility, typically the sciatic nerve and its branches are not moving well, and the body's going to protect it by sacrificing the hamstring. When in my experience, and this nerve stuff is something that I actually have quite a bit of advanced training in, and what happens is what I typically see is if it's an acute, meaning just happened type of injury, it's a lot easier to clear up the nerve stuff. When it's somebody who's had chronic pain for a year plus, that's when it takes a while to clean that stuff up. There's no indication that Kupp had any issues with this before this season. So even if there was some nerve mobility issues, as long as he was seeing somebody who has good training in that stuff, they should have been able to clear that up pretty quickly. So nerve becomes less of an issue. Still, that hamstring has to heal, though. Typically 21 to 28 days for healing for a muscle. He fits in that timeline. It should be pretty healed. But on the other end, we heard some reports this week that the Rams want him at 80 to 90% and that he wasn't there yet. I'm going to start there, and then we'll kind of come back to it in a second. 80% is a low bar. Low bar. I don't like that number. I hope that was just a misreporting or somebody misspoke. I want my athletes at 90 to 95% when they go back to playing. So that was just bizarre that they said 80% in my opinion, especially since the Rams have a very, very, very good training staff. I was just kind of taken back by that number. But then we see him practicing in full, by all reports at least, full practice this week. So maybe he is above 80%. Maybe he is closer to 90, 95%. Just some kind of weird contradicting reporting this week, in my opinion. But kind of going back to what I said first, he's Cooper freaking Kupp. You're not going to bench him. Will he be at 100%? Maybe not. They said that he's not going to be on a snap restriction, but I think he will be because I think they'll ease him back in. But even if he's getting 70% of snaps, he still should be more productive than anybody else you have.
Yeah, I have him at wide receiver 18, and I was gonna ask as well. With these like percentages, I always find them weird because it's like, what is the difference between 80% and 90%? Is it a feel thing, or do maybe the training staff have like certain tests that maybe they want him to clear, and then like that clears him, like, oh, okay, he's at 90% because he's hitting a certain mile per hour on the the tracking system or whatever. Is there like an exact science of the 80% thing, or is it kind of feel?
There's a science, it's not exact. So it is a combination of subjective reports from the player and objective testing. So some of the tests that we look for, we have a lot of cool equipment these days that can measure force output from muscles, like in whatever unit you want. The one I use is in pounds of force because we live in America and that's the unit that we use. So we can literally test how strong is his hamstring on the injured side compared to the uninjured side. And then you can make the percentages from there. We also can look at range of motion, like hamstring flexibility, things like that. We can look at there's a variety of single leg tests that we can do. There's one called the Y balance test. There's something called the star excursion test. The Y balance test is kind of a short form of that. And then there's various single leg hopping tests that really give us a good idea. Is this injured leg close to the uninjured leg in performance? So just to give an example, I have a soccer player right now who I'm working with, and he has a tournament today. And I saw him on Thursday, and his strength was equal, his range of motion was equal, but he did horrible on the hop tests on the injured side. So I was like, dude, you're not playing this week. You're close, but you're not ready. So it is a combination of what the player feels, their confidence level. It's a huge component, but there is a number of objective tests that we do as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's nice to know that it's not just vibes, like, because that's kind of what I was thinking in my head, is that it was just like, I feel 80%, but that does make a ton of sense. Now, I will say we have two guys, both hamstrings as well, wrapping up kind of our hamstring section here. We have the Packers, where we did touch on them last week after the Thursday night game, but I am just kind of curious where they're at. I know they were kind of both on touch counts here. Has anything changed in terms of the news you've heard this week on kind of what we're expecting for them moving forward?
Well, the good thing is we did not hear anything negative, meaning neither of them aggravated it during the game. They both were lower snap rates. Jones was 35%. Watson, I think, was 48 or close to 50% of snaps. So the team did a good job of managing them to make sure that they didn't, or to reduce the likelihood of them re-aggravating things. I expect both of them to see a big jump in their snap rate this week. A.J. Dillon stinks. Aaron Jones is really good. It's as simple as that there. And Watson's clearly one of the better receivers on this team as well. So they played Thursday last week, and they play Monday this week. So that's a whole 11 days, if my math is correct, for them to continue to rehab and heal. Jones, you can definitely start. Watson, I think, will be much, much closer to 100% than he was last week. And depending on your roster construction, I have no problems with starting him.
Yeah, I have him as like a top 25 play this week, Christian Watson. I think he wasn't at he wasn't at a full diet of routes last week. I am curious to kind of see where he was, Christian Watson, but I think he was like at like 67% or something there. Yeah, he was at 48%. So it will be interesting to see where he gets up to. I imagine he probably clears like 75% this week. I have him as a top 25 guy here. But you're saying not too much to worry about with either here this week.
That's how I feel. Watson would be the one that I would be more concerned for a re-injury, simply just because he's a receiver and he's had this injury a couple times before. But at this time, I think you're okay with starting him this week.
All right. Now, we do have a pair of the guys who are coming off of Kupp, or not a pair, but we talked about Kupp. Now we have Taylor coming off of the pup right here. I know you've had your concerns with his ankle history. I'm kind of curious what, what you've been hearing with the reports coming out of Indianapolis, and kind of what you're expecting on the injury side of things, because we do have the weird, like, he wanted to hold out and get traded, but just from like the injury standpoint, what are our expectations?
Well, I haven't seen any negative news, which is good. What I have seen is he practiced, and then they say as long as he's feeling okay, he should play. Those words right there just continue to solidify that he is still dealing with this ankle injury from last year. That doesn't mean he can't play well, though. But I would temper your expectations for this week just from a collection of things. One, the ankle injury. Are they going to give him a full workload simply because of the injury? Probably not, I would think. Two, it's his first action all season. Like, he didn't do anything in the offseason, training camp, none of that. We saw how Josh Jacobs struggled big time those first couple weeks after doing pretty much nothing all offseason. Three, Zach Moss has been playing well. He's not elite by any means. Taylor's obviously better than Zach Moss, but Moss has been giving them production. I don't think they just completely take him off the field. And then Tennessee's got a pretty good run defense. So purely from an injury standpoint, I think he can play well. The risk is totally there for not only another ankle injury, but high ankle sprains, especially when there was 3 of them in a short period of time that required surgery. Usually you end up losing some function of that ankle, whether that be range of motion in multiple different planes, whether that be strength, power, something usually doesn't get back to 100% that can then influence stuff in the knee, the hip, the back, etc. Again, not wishing that on him by any means, but just making everyone aware that this is the type of injury that can influence other injuries. So can he play well? Sure. I just don't know that this is the week that I'm ready to start him.
And it makes sense too. I want to say, when there was the weird drama in the offseason, I want to say that he there was some buzz that he had like a back injury, which kind of makes sense as well, that it could have stemmed from the ankle, kind of what you're saying with sort of
Yeah,
how it can
totally.
compound and mess up with other things. Which I think a weird side thing, but I had a buddy who like sprained his ankle a bunch of times. And it kind of aggravated something that then like led to sciatica, which was like a big issue there. But with Jonathan Taylor, he's my RB25 this week. I'm not crazy about starting him, but I imagine you probably don't have much better options if Jonathan Taylor's on your team. I mean, maybe you got lucky and you have like Kyron Williams and Jerome Ford, and you've just been, scavenging players. But Jonathan Taylor to me is like a high-end RB3, fringy RB2 this week in a tough matchup. Now, at number 7, our next player, we have Saquon Barkley. He's also coming back from an ankle issue. Didn't play on Thursday, and Table was saying that he could play literally or no, they didn't have a Thursday night game. I think it was Monday night, that game. But they had the Thursday night game the first time, and he was like, oh, you could maybe play here. He's a fast healer, and, he still has not played yet. What's kind of the expectation with Saquon this week?
I wouldn't put it past him to play this week, but I doubt that he's at 100%. Remember, high ankle sprains make it difficult to change direction and cut. We just saw Khalil Herbert the other night, high ankle sprain. He tries to go back in very first play. He tries to make a cut, and he just goes right to the ground. He's like, nope, I'm done. That's different because that was minutes after his injury occurred. Saquon's going to now be 2.5, 3 weeks out from his injury, so it shouldn't be that bad. But still, it's not easy to make that cut until this ankle's fully healed, which it's not going to be at this point, but it could be close enough that he can play with a heavy tape job or bracing it up. But probably not 100% of snaps that he typically does. We'll probably see a hit on his snap count. And I think not performing at the typical level that we see him. Now, is 80% Saquon Barkley going to score you more points than your next guy? Probably. So you're still playing him if he plays. Not a guy I would target in DFS this week. I would just temper your expectations, but you still have to play him if he plays.
Yeah, I got him RB18 this week. If he does play, if he doesn't, I will say, if you still have Matt Breida hanging around on a roster, I mean, Breida's probably like a RB25 to RB30 type of guy that you can play if Saquon can't go. It seems like it's going to be a true toss-up, so I would definitely just, keep your your eyes out and your ears out for the Schefter like late night tweet for Saquon. But we have somebody else who I was shocked. Like, I don't know. I wasn't all that familiar with the actual injury that Javonte had, and I'm sure you're going to get into it in a second. But it seemed like for sure he wasn't going this week, and now he's like back at practice, like maybe in the mix. What's going on with Javonte?
Originally reported as a hip flexor injury. You're also seeing reports of a quad injury, and they go hand in hand. One of the hip flexor muscles, called the rectus femoris, is also one of the quad muscles. So I'm interpreting that as a rectus femoris strain to its tendon, which attaches up in the hip. And while that is a big, strong, powerful muscle, there are other muscles that can take over to compensate for athletic function, like running and cutting. This is an injury that impacts a soccer player much more because of the kicking motion, much, much more than a running back it would. So it's not out of the question for him to play with it. It might hinder his top end speed and cutting a little. My concern here, and I have not seen any reports that this is happening. I'm just simply educating the listeners here that tendon, of the rectus femoris, that hip flexor / quad muscle, has attachments onto the hip labrum, and sometimes we see concurrent injury of this rectus femoris plus the hip labrum. I haven't heard that report yet. Hopefully that's not present. That is something that could develop if this injury gets worse. But at this time, that does not sound like it's the case. It's, again, just simply educating people here. We have a very, 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 very small sample size on running backs playing after a hip flexor strain. So we cannot draw conclusions off these numbers, but we do see a pretty significant decline of 35% fantasy points for running backs in their first game after hip flexor strain. Again, it's a tiny sample size. That is not a conclusive number. But in that small sample, that's the trend. It's that these running backs don't play great after it. He hasn't really been that productive anyway, and it sounds like they want to get Jaleel McLaughlin going a little bit. So I'm not encouraging anyone to start Javonte this week. I don't think this is an injury that's going to impact him long term. I just don't like him this week because of that, as well as the team in general.
I was going to ask kind of what, not to put you on the spot, but kind of what has, in terms of your expectations for Javonte with the ACL injury in the offseason. On top of that, I remember his ACL getting compared to J.K. Dobbins, and I feel like J.K. Dobbins also had some hip issues as well. Is there any sort of parallels there? And then also just kind of like in terms of what your expectations were in the offseason for Javonte coming off the ACL, where has he kind of been at this point? Because I will say his career average is over like 4 yards per carry. Right now he's at like 3.63. Like he has been very inefficient. He's like 38th in yards per carry. In terms of yards with the contact per attempt, he's like 40th. Like he doesn't have the same juice that he had before. Now that was expected, but I'm kind of curious kind of where you think he's at in terms of recovery.
He's right where I expected. I talked a lot before the season started how running backs just don't play well in the first year after, and even just an isolated ACL, let alone an ACL plus all the other stuff that Javonte had. I do think he will he will start to improve as the season goes on. But the first half of the season, I was never really expecting much, and that's what we're seeing. I did think that possibly Sean Payton would get him in space in the passing game a little bit more, which could have made him productive. But this team is not very good at all, and I don't see Javonte being largely effective for fantasy over the next month or so. Possibly in the second half of the season, as he continues to get stronger and more confident in that knee, we see a little bit more juice. But this may be a situation where it's next year that he's fantasy relevant again.
Yeah, and I do actually, before we move on here, I do want to touch on as well. I didn't have him written down, but kind of just as a parallel there, just in terms of, I guess, what you've seen and just like the production so far. How do you feel about Breece Hall at this point? Again, I didn't have him on the sheet, but I mean, we had the report this week that Robert Saleh said there's going to be no more restrictions, even though that was taken a little bit out of context. I'm sort of curious, like, I imagine he's kind of been on par with about what you've expected from him. He's had a couple of like really long runs that maybe would have been touchdowns pre-ACL. Kind of like just what's kind of the overall vibe right now with what you've seen from Breece Hall and kind of his progression here?
I think Hall's in a much better spot than Javonte for a couple reasons. One, his, as far as we know, was only the ACL repaired. So that means rehab's a lot faster, a lot smoother, especially the first month, 2 months, which really sets the tone for the rest of the rehab. And he's looked good in spurts, like especially that first game. We saw a couple big plays. That's the trajectory we often see is a player has like a big run. We're like, oh, he looks like he's back, and then they struggle a little, and then it's a big run, and they struggle, and then the big runs become more consistent as they regain that last bit of strength, power, and confidence is the really big one. So I think Breece Hall, I'm a lot more bullish on his outlook for the rest of the season. He's the one that really profiled as the type of player that could overcome the ACL in year one, which hardly any running backs can do. But his combination of age, time of the injury, only an ACL repaired, and just an absolute off the charts athlete profiled him to be the guy that could really play well in that first year after an ACL. And we've seen that in spurts. I think we'll continue to see that.
Yeah, I agree. And the schedule lightens up here as well. They've played Buffalo, Dallas, KC, all pretty crazy defensive lines here. He gets a bye in week 7. And then after that, I'd imagine we're expecting kind of wheels up for Breece Hall. Now, after that, we have Davante Adams, who's another one of these. I mean, him and DeAndre Hopkins, I feel like they're trading every week of just like not practicing with like, some kind of injury that like maybe they could not play. So it seems like Davante Adams hasn't practiced at all this week. What's your expectation for him? Is it one of these just like very common AC sprain or AC joint sprains we've talked about, or what's kind of the mechanism there?
That's what it looked like. They never fully clarified it, but we know that he did go back and finish the game. But it's often the next day is worse with these kind of injuries. If he can go, you play him no matter what. The problem is, I believe he plays Monday night, so you got to have someone to pivot to if he doesn't play. We see about a 15 to 20% drop in snap rate for receivers after shoulder injuries. I would anticipate that occurring with Davante based off how his injury looked, and he's even said that he does not feel good. But Davante Adams in a reduced role can still be very effective because he is a guy that can take it the distance on any play. He's just really freaking good. So you have to have a pivot ready, but I think you plan on starting him.
Yeah, I'd say that's where I'm at as well. If he plays, he's like a top 5 play this week. He's just been that good. I'm trying to think of like what you could pivot to, but it is tough. It's not like Jacoby Meyer's not going to be on waivers. I mean,
It's not
maybe Jaden
much.
Reed is hanging out there, but it's like it's tough. I mean, maybe you find a way to pivot to a running back or something, but it is one of those really tough decisions where I think I might have to move him down the rankings in a way where it's like like if you're debating between like Davante Adams and Ayuk, and it's like Adams is a
Yeah, I
toss
would go
up.
Ayuk.
Yeah. So I think I got to probably move him to a spot where it's like, it's not even so much like Davante Adams versus this guy projection wise. It's just if you have an option like this, don't take the risk. But yeah, you're going to have to sort of weigh your options, and it's not, the calculus isn't so much who's going to score more. Is this player going to be 85% of what you can expect from Davante Adams? And at that point, maybe you play him instead. Now, the old quarterback for Davante Adams, or I guess like the previous quarterback, we have Derek Carr here, who was just an absolute shell of himself. Like it was shocking that if he was this banged up. I'm not sure if you saw like the passing charts, but they set a record where Kamara had 13 catches for 33 yards. It was like the least amount of yards on that many catches. Like very clear, dumping things off, horizontal offense, just like crazy limited. I just as like a Jameis guy, I'm pretty annoyed that wasn't Jameis out there. What can we expect? Like, are we going to have another one of these like low A dot horizontal games, or should this be kind of what we've seen from Derek Carr the rest of the season?
He should not have been playing last week. It's as simple as that. It should be better this week. Definitely better. Another week to heal. I didn't see any reports that things got worse, but he's not going to be at 100% still. And this being an AC joint, like that joint has to move during the throwing arc of the shoulder. It's not going to be as painful this week unless he takes a bad hit. So he should have a little bit more throw power and accuracy, but it's still going to be hindered. So it puts obviously you're not starting him unless you're in a 2 QB league. You're not starting Carr in a 1 QB league. No way. But we have to think about the other assets on that team. Kamara was fine because it was all the dump outs. You're still starting him for sure. Olave, it's very hard to bench him just because of what he can do. So I do believe you still have to play him. I don't know that I would start anybody else. If he's not able to throw the ball down the field, they have to put Jameis in. And I don't think they will unless Carr gets hurt further, but we'll see what they do there. You're not starting Carr. You are starting Kamara. You have to start Olave.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. I also threw out there, I do like a sneaky starts video every Friday, and I do have Rashid Shaheed there, but it is a little bit tough because Carr might not be able to get him the ball, but Rashid Shaheed does have a great matchup versus the Patriots. We'll see if I don't know, we'll see if Carr is back to normal. It didn't really click for me as well that it's his throwing shoulder as well. It's just, I still can't believe that he played in that game last week. It was just
He
like,
shouldn't have. It should have been Jameis.
yeah. But we have another sort of similar quarterback situation of just like a guy who is sort of a shell of himself, low A dot. Uh, where are we at on the Joe Burrow thing? We now have like T. Higgins is hurt. Like this whole Bengals thing's been an absolute shit show all year. What are we seeing on the Bengals front?
For Burrow, like I said last week, we just continue to wait until we see it. Do not drop him, but you can't put him out there until you see it. Again, it's a right calf injury. He needs to power off that right calf for throw power, and he clearly just is not able to do that as well as we're used to. And what happens when we're not generating power at a joint that we're used to doing? I mean, think he's probably thrown a football over 1 million times in his life, like that throwing pattern. That pattern has to change now because he's not getting as much force from the calf that he's used to. So he has to now, on the go, try to figure out where else he's going to get that power from. And then that's going to sacrifice accuracy to some degree. It's very tough to make that adjustment for a thrower, someone who's done that motion millions of times in his life, to just suddenly need to do it differently. The good news is there's no reports of setbacks, which makes him more healthy this week than last week, but still not 100%. Muscle, we're looking at about 21 to 28 days to heal, and we know he had that setback, I believe, is week 3. So he'll be about 14 days out from that setback, which will have him in a better spot than last week, but still not fully healthy. Re-injury risk remains high. We continue to bench him until he shows that he's got it, which could come at any time, but I'm not risking 6 points from my quarterback. As far as T. Higgins goes, it's a rib fracture, which is worse than just a vague rib injury like we've seen with Deebo Samuel and DK Metcalf this year. But the good news is it's only one rib, and with a true fracture of the rib, as long as the fracture site doesn't pose risk to penetrating the lungs, you can technically play with it. It hurts like crazy, though. And we got to think about the function of the ribs in athletics. Whenever we breathe, the ribs move. When we run, we breathe more. Ribs move more. That hurts more. Big time muscles like the lats, pecs, and obliques attach on these ribs. Those are highly involved in reaching up to catch a ball, stiff arming someone, holding the ball tight so you don't fumble, twisting your body to make the catch, bracing for impact. When these muscles contract or get stretched, they pull on the rib, which if it's at the site of the fracture, that's going to hurt. He may play because he's a tough dude, but he's not going to play a regular snap count, I don't believe. We've already seen him, I think it was last year, I think it might have even been in the fantasy playoffs. He was questionable with, I think it was a hamstring injury, played like one snap, and that was it. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I don't see a world where he plays a typical snap share, and he's only had one game this season where he's been effective. His quarterback's been ineffective. He's another one that I am leaving on the bench this week.
Yeah, I don't even have him ranked in my top 50 wide receivers right now. We've gotten the T. Higgins rope-a-dope before, where I think that was week 14 you were talking about versus Cleveland. He was like supposed to play, and then he just didn't. So I don't know. He could play. He could play. 20% of the snaps. I don't know. The offense has been struggling enough that even if he miraculously played 100%, I'm still not sure I'd be all that interested. Now after that, we have Rhamondre Stevenson, who kind of I didn't really catch this on Sunday that anything really happened to him, but I have him listed as a thigh injury. What's kind of going on with the thigh? Is it kind of a hamstring issue? Is it more of a quadricep issue? What's going on there?
Yeah, he kind of snuck onto the injury list. It looked like we didn't even cover him on my show on Wednesday because there was like no chatter about him. But typically, when they're reporting a thigh injury, that's a quad injury. They always say hamstring or groin, just about. So we're going to interpret this as a quad injury. Quad is obviously powerful muscle for acceleration and cutting. But even with that, we don't see that significant of a dip in fantasy production for running backs, only about a 5% dip. Now, some of that is inflated from David Montgomery's game the other night, where he just absolutely went off. Prior to that, we were seeing somewhere around a 15% dip in production. But even still, with the running back landscape, I know Rhamondre hasn't been great, but he's better than a lot of other guys, and he's a true runs the ball, catches the ball, gets into the end zone type back. He hasn't put together a tremendous season this far, but he is very talented, and they use him in a lot of different ways. I think it's safe to play him if he suits up this week.
Yeah, it seems like he logged in three limiteds this week, so it seems like almost a true game time decision. I imagine he'll be somebody else that you wait for the midnight dump or whatever, and see if he's expected to play. We then also have I wrote down Zay Jones, where Zay Jones, I know he got hurt early in the year, and then I haven't really gotten many updates on kind of where that's at with Zay Jones. I guess I don't think anyone's really playing him. I'm just kind of curious, and it does matter because Christian Kirk didn't really pop off until Zay Jones got hurt because Christian Kirk wasn't playing in two wide receiver sets. He only played like 68% of the routes week one. So I'm curious, is Zay Jones going to be back in the mix? Will he be effective? What's kind of going on with the knee?
Not a ton of info. They had been very vague about just all they're saying is knee injury. They're not specifying what. We don't. This is another one. It looks like it's going to be a game time decision. I definitely would not start him, but that's a good point about Christian Kirk. I still think Kirk is reliable, whether Jones plays or not. We know that Lawrence just has a really good rapport with him. It almost seems like he favors him over Ridley, even though Ridley profiles as the better receiver. So Zay Jones, we're not starting this week, even if he plays. I think Kirk, you can suit up either way, whether Jones is in or out.
Yeah, I agree. I think until Zay Jones is like 100% and it's not like iffy if he'll go or whatever, I think even if he does go, I think Kirk has done enough to be out there in two wide receiver sets. Now, I'm going to edit this in and post. I did send you a video last night of Kyle Pitts. Jetpack Galileo did a little compilation, and it just seems like the right knee and the right leg for Kyle Pitts hasn't been as reliable as he would like. I guess I'm just kind of curious in terms of just I know that he had some sort of MCL damage in the offseason. I guess like if you want to touch on kind of what the exact injury is that he was recovering from, and kind of what you saw if you checked out the video.
Well, there was quite a bit of, I don't know if I would say red flags, but at least yellow flags heading up to the season about Pitts because it was an MCL repair, is what was reported, which generally about 6 months to full function. But well after that, he was not participating in OTAs, mini camps, anything like that. So at the time, I was writing and tweeting that it's hard to know, and this is back like June, July. I was writing, it's hard to know if his lack of participation is because he's behind in rehab or if the team is, that's just how they're managing. Because the last phase of every surgical rehab is sports specific stuff. So something like an OTA or a mini camp where there's no contact, I would expect a player to be out there running routes as part of that sports specific rehab, like still part, like not cleared to play, but that is literally part of rehab, is running for tight ends, gonna be running routes, simulating blocking, footwork, stuff like that. So now we're seeing this, we're seeing coaches saying that he's not 100%. one of a couple things could be happening. Either he's just way, way, way behind in this rehab, or there was more repaired than they told us. I know some people have speculated maybe there's a meniscus involvement, possible, totally possible, or capsular involvement, which, if you remember, the capsule is a word that just came out as far as part that Nick Chubb needed repaired. So that's just like, it's a connective tissue that I describe it as like a wrapping paper around a joint, but it has quite a bit of a role in stability. And when they get injured, sometimes it can lead to scarring, which can limit range of motion. Now, something I noticed in the during training camp videos was Kyle Pitts was not getting full what's called knee extension or straightening off that surgical leg. You could see his left leg was with running, but his right leg was lacking about 5 or 10 degrees. So there's a lot of evidence that he's not 100% right now. That said, I also think that his lack of production is just the team, man. I mean, Drake London's not producing either, and he's healthy. Desmond Ridder is not a good quarterback for the NFL. Definitely not a good quarterback for providing for fantasy assets. So it's a combination of a lot of things with Pitts struggling. He's probably not at 100% health. That should get better as the season goes on. But also, is this team going to use him? Are they going to switch to Heineke? I really hope they do switch to Heineke. He's more fun, one, but also he can provide for fantasy assets much better than Ridder can. Is the team going to use him? I don't know. I benched Kyle Pitts this week. I picked up Cole Kmet. I'm very happy with the 12.9 points or something that he got me. You can't start Kyle Pitts right now.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts. The video I'm referencing again. I'll throw it up, but it's just like, seems like he can't really cut off. Like the right leg is just, it's not great. Like he's stumbling around a ton. Like you said, though, it is an awful environment that he's in. I do think I am a Kyle Pitts apologist on this channel. I will say I do think that there are better days ahead where either Desmond Ridder improves or they go to Taylor Heineke. You know what I mean? Like I do think there's going to be better quarterback play in the future where either he has to improve or they put in Taylor Heineke. I think I was also going to say there was somebody on the Jets as well. I can't remember. Like, of course, Breece Hall, but I think even Dalvin Cook a little bit too. Like, is there something to like? I've heard the phrase like getting your legs under you. Like, is that a real thing? Like getting your legs under you and like sort of, I guess just like being a part of at game speed and getting to game speed is kind of a process.
Yeah, for sure. Think about Kyle Pitts as an athlete, elite, right? Very, very fast, agile, jumping, all that stuff. That's all he knows is playing at that high level speed. He's been doing it his whole life, and he's been doing it very, very well. So now let's say, going back to some of that testing that we can do for like how does one leg compare to the other, let's just hypothetically say his injured leg is at 90% of the uninjured leg. What he's still going to try to go at the speed and the quickness that he's used to pre-injury. But if his leg isn't at the capacity to handle it, we may see things like slipping on routes or stumbling out of a break or things like that. A lot of that is physical, and then there's also the mental part. We cannot undermine the importance of like sports psychology when coming back from big injuries. Like there's so much to getting your confidence in this case, your leg back, but also these athletes have memory of getting injured. So I think it was a crossing route, 20, 30 yards down the field, middle of the field. It's not out of the question that when he goes across the middle of the field, he's thinking about that. Or whether it's conscious or just kind of deep down there, it's not out of the question that that's a concern of his. So, and that'll go for any athlete. Like Stefania Bell did an awesome interview with Saquon Barkley last training camp when he was in his second year back from his ACL. And he straight up said, first year back from ACL, I did not really trust my knee. Now I do. So with any kind of major knee surgery, that's always something we need to be thinking about. And we're usually not going to know what the athlete's psychological state is, but it's something that we at least need to respect as fans that, man, he had a big injury. If I had that injury, I would be a little bit hesitant with playing at 100% speed again, too.
Yeah, and Kyle Pitts as well. It's it's scary because you have this new literature in the NFL where you have to go low, you can't go high anymore, and he's a 6'6" upright runner. Where a lot of those guys are trained go low. He's 6'6", 245 pounds. That's really the only way that one of these 5'10", buck 95 guys is going to get a guy like Kyle Pitts down. So I can definitely see that where he's thinking across the middle, he's open, and he's sort of second guessing things. Now, I also say too, something that I did want to check out. The Jets have released like this documentary thing that they're doing with like Breece Hall, where they kind of like documented his, I guess his journey or whatever, which is interesting. People always sort of forget, like, there is a person going through a rehab, and that's all like a brutal, brutal process. But I also wanted to touch on one last player here that I didn't write down, but Khalil Herbert. Like you touched on it for a second, and it kind of clicked, and I like didn't say anything about it, but that looked really weird. He comes back. I mean, he's an absolute warrior for coming back in. He like tapes the hell out of it, comes back in for like a rush or two, and then is like, all right, I'm done. And of course, they were in a pickle because they didn't have Roschon, so they were running with a fullback the rest of the game because they didn't have an active running back. I guess sort of. I don't know how much info we've gotten since Thursday, but what did you kind of see with the mechanism and sort of the expectation for Khalil Herbert, even to play like as soon as next week or something?
That was clear as day, high ankle sprain, no question about it. So with that, there's a spectrum of how long guys miss. Running backs, it's 0 games to Christian McCaffrey missed 6 games. Average is about 2.5. With it being a Thursday game, that obviously gives him a few more days to get ready. So we'll see. Kind of the same analysis that we covered with Saquon will apply here, where it's going to make it hard to cut. And we literally saw that with Herbert. He went in for one play, tried to cut, went straight to the ground, was like, nope, I'm done. We'll look out for him next week. We'll talk about him next week. It's too premature to make any assumptions at this point just because of that spectrum. Some guys miss 0 games, some miss 6. We're not going to get any reports probably until they start practicing next week.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Now, I was more so asking just in terms of like a Deonta Foreman for waiver, because I'm gonna have to do a waiver wire video early next week. So I think Deonta Foreman makes a ton of sense as somebody that could come in. Deonta Foreman's a guy I drafted a decent bit of, so it kind of sucks there. But if Roschon can't go with the concussion, we've had guys this year. It seems like not many are clearing concussion protocol in 1 week. I mean, I think Musgrave might have just done it, but he had the Thursday. So yeah, something to look out for.
So as far as concussion goes, a good friend of mine is a concussion specialist. Like that's what he does, and it's athletes predominantly that he's working with. And he wrote the concussion article on the fantasyinjuryteam.com, and he's come on our show a couple times and talked about how the average duration to return to play after concussion is 16 days. So that's 2 NFL games for the most part. And I know there's been the reports this year that not so many players are playing the next week, and the perception from fans and the media has been like, oh wow, that's kind of weird. That's actually not weird. That's normal. And I think this is going to sound crazy. I think that's good that they're taking longer to come back, because that's giving them more time to really be ready and healed and healthy. If you get a second concussion while you are still recovering from the first one, bad things can happen. So it's good that we're letting these guys have the time to heal. But as far as what you're talking about, yeah, Deonta Foreman may be a guy to target in the waivers if Herbert is still out and if Roschon is not clearing the concussion protocol. Who else do they have? They're not going to start a fullback at running back. So Deonta Foreman could be in for a big workload.
Yeah, and I agree. It's a good thing. It seems like they're being more strict across the board with the concussion stuff. I imagine because of the Tua thing last year. You even had to remember Jamal Adams was like going to kill I guess they have like a third party guy in the sidelines, and he was upset that he was telling him dude, he took like a knee to the head from Daniel Jones, who's not a small guy at all. I know it sucks that, he hasn't played for like a year or whatever, but it was probably the correct call, so it's good to see that they are being a little more strict with head injuries, because those are definitely scary. But we've been here for a while. Of course, as always, I appreciate your time, Tom. Let the people know where they can find you, what you got going on, anything to look out for as we head into game day tomorrow.
Yeah, so Twitter or X at Fantasy Injury T. That is my personal one. The Fantasy Injury Team is at injury_fantasy. We have our podcast, Fantasy Injury Team, on all platforms. We have our YouTube channel, Fantasy Injury Team, and our Instagram, which is also Fantasy Injury Team.
And I'll make sure I have all those links down below. Of course, Tom, always enjoy having you on here. I actually feel like I'm learning things about injuries here. But I appreciate everyone out here that's watching. Hope that everyone, gets as much out of this as I do. As always, leave a like, subscribe, comment down below. I appreciate all the support on the channel recently. As always, I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, I surround my body like